Janneke, and today I'm excited to have Robert Schwartz back on my show. Hello, Robert. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Yannicka. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yes, like we spoke a few years ago. I think it was 2013, and I saw that many saw our interview, and I was thinking that perhaps this is a topic that many are interested in. So I wanted to bring you back to dive even deeper into the topic because it's vast. It's truly vast, and you are a hypnotherapist, a trained hypnotherapist, and you are the author of the two books, Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, who are really popular, and it covers the concept of pre-birth planning. And you introduce the idea that we plan our lives as souls before we go down to this planet, before we incarnate, and in great detail, in fact. And in our last interview, we spoke a bit about your journey, how you got into this, and also how you received this information, and that you got it from mediums and channelers who also verified their abilities for you, how they are able to see kind of through the veil in a way. And they really had so many examples that you weren't doubting anymore. And for those who haven't watched the interview and want to learn more about that, you can watch it, and I'll keep it's in the eye up here in the video. But I was thinking now that we can actually start by repeating a little bit the whole process for those who are a bit new to this. How how this works, like how we actually plan our lives before we go down to this earth, how that looks like, because that's hard to picture in a way.
Yeah. Uh, well, let me first say the website is yoursoulsplan.com. And if your viewers go to the books page there, they can read large portions of both Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift for free. Basically, what happens in the pre-birth planning process is that the soul creates a life plan. And then the soul takes a portion of its energy and places that portion of its energy in a physical body. That is what we would call the personality. Now, the personality is created by the soul prior to birth. So after the soul has created the life plan is presented by the soul and the guides to the personality. And at that point, almost everybody accepts the life plan as it is. But a very small percentage of personalities will say, you know what, that's a little bit too much for me. And if you say that, then your soul revises the plan, maybe makes it a little bit easier. And then the plan is presented to you again. And at that point, almost everybody accepts, and then the incarnation begins.
Okay, so to you, how do you understand what a soul is?
I understand a soul to be what you could call a spark of God. So there are basically, as I understand it, three levels of the soul. The highest level, the highest frequency or vibration, is a level of total oneness. There's only really one being in the universe. A step lower than that, there's the individuated soul, and then a step lower in frequency is the personality. Now, I'm talking about these three levels as though they're completely distinct. They're really not, but due to the limits of language, it's difficult to present it any other way. But that's essentially my understanding of how the universe is set up.
And our soul, that contains all our lifetimes, right? All incarnations on this planet, on other planets, like, yeah, all of them.
Yeah, the soul, you could think of the soul, for example, as being like the sun, and each personality is like a ray of light, a sunbeam being projected from the sun. But you're correct, the soul contains all of the lifetimes, past, present, and future, both physical and non-physical.
Right. So, what I was wondering about when I was doing research on this again was that it seems very linear to me. And from my understanding, time is not linear, it's just a perception we have, and time is an illusion. But still, it seems like the soul is preparing for a mission that's going to happen in the future. You know what I mean? So, I don't kind of understand that everything that happens here and now when you are planning to go down to Earth.
Yeah, this is something that is very difficult to understand from the level of the personality because the human brain is essentially a biocomputer. and it's set up to perceive linear time. There's a very good reason for that, because by immersing ourselves in the experience of linear time and giving ourselves a past, a present, and a future, there's a lag time that's created between our vibrations, our thoughts, our feelings, and the things they manifest in the physical realm. That lag time gives you time to reconsider whether or not that's the vibration or the frequency you want to project into the universe. So it's a very effective learning tool. But in terms of the incarnations, you could think of it as being like a CD that has 7 songs on it. If you and I listen to a CD, due to the limitations of the 5 senses, we can only hear one song at a time. If each song represents one lifetime, your soul would have no such limitation. Your soul would be listening to all 7 songs simultaneously, so to speak.
So, could we then, from soul's perspective, choose to go into the past or into the future as well?
You can. And when the soul is creating a lifetime, it's as though the soul has a history book in front of it with literally no beginning and literally no end. And the soul is metaphorically thumbing through the history book, looking for the exact right spot in linear time to have an incarnation in order to learn certain lessons. But from our perspective, the sequence of lives, if we want to say that there's a sequence, is not linear. So you might have an incarnation now, and then your next lifetime is in the linear past, and then your next lifetime after that could be in the future from now, if that makes sense.
Yes, my mind stops immediately. So I don't think I can understand in a way. So tell us, what sort of lessons can it be that we're going to learn, that a soul could learn? Just to give some examples.
For example, yesterday in my hypnosis practice, I practiced something called a between-life soul regression, in which under hypnosis, the client goes to speak to what is called the Council of Elders. These are the very wise, loving, highly evolved beings who oversee the cycle of reincarnation on Earth, and they know everything about you, including your life plan. So I had a client yesterday who, in the Between Lives regression, we start off with a very short past life, and she saw herself as a man in a past lifetime. They were fleeing some kind of wartime conflict. She, as the man, was with her 10-year-old daughter. They fled a city, went out into the countryside. The man went into a cave looking for shelter, told his daughter, wait outside the cave until I come back. And then there was an avalanche in the cave, and he ended up suffocating to death. Well, when he returned home to the other side, he felt guilty about what had happened, even though it was in no way his fault. He felt that he had abandoned his 10-year-old daughter. So the plan in this lifetime, according to the Council of Elders, when we spoke to them, was for this soul to incarnate in a family in which she was very, very different from everybody else, and also feel guilty about being so different, which is in fact exactly what happened. It was set up to be a lesson in mastering guilt, how to release guilt that she was not able to release in the past lifetime. So there's a certain sense of wanting to, quote unquote, get something right, which was not accomplished in a previous life.
Some sort of balancing a karma, would you say?
This is a little bit different than balancing karma. To give an example of what would be balancing karma, for example, let's say the 2 people had a past life in which one was ill and the other person was that person's caregiver. When those 2 people transition back to the non-physical realm, back home at the end of the lifetime, they have a life review, as we all do. And if they see in their life review that they feel incomplete with this caregiver relationship, and they are the ones who make that decision, by the way, it's not a council external to them. If they feel incomplete with that relationship, that feeling of incompletion is the karma. So the way that they would balance it and release it is to trade places. The one who was ill becomes the caregiver. The one who was the caregiver takes on the life challenge of physical illness. Then at the end of that lifetime, presumably they would feel complete with the experience, and that would be the end of the karma.
Yeah, karma, I feel like it is a tricky one because, in a sense, you can create more and more karma sometimes. I'm just wondering, is it possible ever to clear it, because there's always new stuff coming up, right? Challenges, and then you'll perhaps create karma again and you'll have to come back again.
Well, that's a very good question. This is why the average soul will have hundreds, if not thousands, of incarnations on planet Earth, because it will take probably a number of hundred of incarnations before you even come to the realization that there is such a thing as karma and start in a very conscious way to live so that you don't create more. Then once you've reached that level, then you've still got a lot of lifetimes, presumably, to balance the karma that you previously created. This is why it takes a very, very long time to complete the cycle of incarnation on Earth. And there are souls who get stuck, so to speak, because they don't realize that they're creating more karma with an additional lifetime.
So what I don't get, in a way, is that, okay, so this information is coming out more and more, especially the last 20 years with internet and everything. It's not so mysterious anymore. It's not like, the what is it called, the Book of Miracles, or the I don't remember the name, but it was this book that was so holy and special, and just a few people had it. I'll remember it later. And now it's like available for everyone. So this knowledge is here for everyone. And then I'm wondering, so why don't we wake up from within, in a way? Why isn't this given to us when it's so important that we wake up to this fact in order to release everything we need to release, in order to grow? Why isn't it more naturally just happening within me? Like all of a sudden I see beyond the veil, Do you understand my question?
I think I do. The answer, in my opinion, is that the soul and a person's guides are always nudging them internally, whispering to them, so to speak, encouraging them to wake up and understand that you are an eternal divine being temporarily having a physical experience. But at least in Western society, such great emphasis has been placed on the mind, on intellect, on logic, on reason. People are trained in the West from a very young age to dismiss intuitive promptings or yearnings as foolishness and to rely instead on the intellect and on logic. So if you grow up in that kind of environment, it's very easy to go through most or even all of a lifetime ignoring the impulses that are coming constantly from your soul and from your guides.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, many people are speaking about coming to the heart, and it's actually such a subtle thing. It's not an easy road. I think it's not an easy journey, actually, to be in the heart. And it's something that we have to figure out, each and every one of us, how that feels like, because it's not easy to explain it with words, in a way. But it's like I see those people who just have it, who are just in their hearts. You can notice that they're very present, in a way. They're not, occupied in their minds. And I think that's each soul's journey, just getting back to the heart, in a way. So I think there's a purpose with it all. I just wish it was easier sometimes. So are there coincidences? I mean, just a small thing, like that I'm picking up this pen, was that supposed to happen? I'm just curious about destiny and free will, how that goes together.
Yeah, what I found in my research for Your Soul's Plan, and especially for Your Soul's Gift, is that there's a very intricate and elegant intersection between free will and pre-birth planning. And I'll illustrate this with a hypothetical example. Let's say that there is a soul, and I'll arbitrarily call this soul Sally, an American woman's name. And this soul, Sally, has had a number of lifetimes in which she made certain plans before she was born. But then after she got here, she had a tendency to defer to the wishes of others. She let other people tell her how to live her life, which is not an uncommon thing to do. When Sally gets back home at the end of those lifetimes and has her life review, She sees that she has this tendency to defer to the wishes of others, and she resolves to bring it back into body energetically, not for the purpose of expressing it, but rather for the purpose of healing it. Now, let's say that there's another soul in her soul group. We'll call this soul George. And George has the opposite tendency. He's had a number of lives in which once he came into body, he dominated others. He told others what to do. When he has his life review, he sees that he has this tendency, and he too resolves to bring it energetically back into body, again, for the purpose of healing it, not for the purpose of expressing it. So, because Sally is in George's soul group, she knows about his plan. So she goes to him before either of them is born, and she says basically, hey, George, I understand that you're carrying back into body the tendency to dominate others for the purpose of healing it. I'm taking back into body the tendency to defer to the wishes of others, also for the purpose of healing it. Why don't we make a pre-birth agreement that we will meet and marry sometime around the age of 30? And our intention is that in our marriage, which we know is going to be difficult, you will learn to respect the wishes of others, and I'll learn to stand up for myself. George says, this is a great plan. Let's do it. Now, let's say when Sally is in body around the age of 25, she gets a job with an employer who treats her with a profound lack of respect and kindness. And she marshals her internal resources, and she says to the employer, stop. If you want me to work here, you must treat me with respect and kindness. In the moment Sally takes a stand like that, there's a tremendous increase in her vibration. If she can sustain that heightened vibration until she's 30, now one of two things will happen. Either she and George never meet, because by virtue of the law of attraction, their vibrations are too dissimilar. Or if they do meet, now there's no connection, there's no chemistry, again, because their vibrations are too dissimilar. So the planned marriage simply never happens. So in this hypothetical, Sally has used her free will to learn the planned lesson, which was to stand up for herself. And that in turn obviates the need for the planned challenge, which was the difficult marriage. Now, somebody listening to this interview is going to say, well, what about George? Doesn't he still have to learn his lesson? Yes, and now he will call to himself another relationship or another set of circumstances that will give him the same opportunity to learn to respect others.
But that means that you would have multiple backup plans then from the soul's perspective.
And that's exactly how it works. So when we talk about there being a pre-birth plan, it's not accurate to say there's only a plan A. There is, but there's also a plan B, C, D, E, F, and on and on and on, to such an extent that it's beyond human comprehension. One of the mediums that I work with in Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, has the ability to go into people's pre-birth planning sessions and hear the conversations they have with each other when they're making the life plan. And she reports consistently in every pre-birth planning session, Spirit shows her something that looks to her like an incredibly vast and elaborate flow chart. Now, what is a flow chart? It's a series of decision points. If you do A, then X happens. If you do B, then Y happens. The flow chart that Spirit shows her is the backup plans made by the soul. So this flow chart is so vast that the number of backup plans is just beyond human comprehension. But that's my understanding of how the pre-birth planning process works.
So they have basically, like these soul or soul masters, have all possible outcomes on the map?
It's not all possible outcomes. Now, remember, we do have free will when we get here. For example, the story of Sally and George, she used her free will in a particular way that allowed her to learn the life plan. But you can also use your free will to make inconsequential decisions, the way you did when you just picked up the purple pen or the purple magic marker. Presumably, your doing that does not have a big impact on your execution of your life plan. So most likely, the decision to pick up that purple pen was not something that was discussed in your pre-birth planning section.
Fascinating. So does that mean that everyone I meet is basically my soulmates? Because either I would know if I am doing my life plan now, or if I made some other choices. But then if I made some other choices, if I executed my free will and I managed to do my life plan, I'm probably then watching now my other potentialities and then other soulmates, right?
Well, it depends on your definition of soulmate. One possible definition of soulmate means the other members of your soul group. A soul group is a collection of souls, and there's debate about the number, but a lot of resources say it's perhaps around 25 or 30 souls who reincarnate repeatedly with each other, and they take turns playing every conceivable role. So you and the other members of your soul group will be daughter and mother, son and father, sister and brother, best of friends, mortal enemies, even murderer and the one who is murdered. And at the soul level, there's absolutely no judgment about any of the roles. They're all viewed as opportunities for learning. So if members of your soul group have agreed to play a key part in your pre-birth plan, then you will most likely meet them. There could be free will decisions that keep you from meeting each other, but your guides will work overtime to bring you together. Now, having said that, it's possible to get off course. And if you get off course, by which I mean you've gone beyond plan A, B, C to a much less desirable plan from the viewpoint of your soul, then there's something that is sometimes referred to as a bump contract, meaning you contract with another member of your soul group to bump you back onto a higher vibrational path so that you can complete plan A or plan B or plan C. A bump contract is usually easy to identify because it will be very brief in duration, and the person who's bumping you back onto your higher path, the relationship is generally extremely intense in nature and has a big impact on the decisions you make. That's how you identify a bump contract.
It's so fascinating. I get so many questions in my head at the same time. I'll take the first one. Why do we need to actually heal through the physical body? Why couldn't we go back to in between lives and heal there?
Well, many people do. There's a wonderful book written by an English woman named Helen Greaves called Testimony of Light. And what happens in this book is that a friend of Helen's passes away and then begins to speak to her from the other side and describes to her in just tremendous detail what our lives are like on the other side. And one of the things the friend tells Helen is that many people, after they pass away, will immediately enter a hospital, or what we would consider to be a hospital, on the other side, in order to bring about emotional healing from traumas that were encountered here on Earth. So healing is very much a part of what we do on the other side. But having said that, I think there are certain things that are best healed in the environment in which they were created. So coming back to Sally and George, for example, those tendencies that they were trying to heal, those are behavioral patterns that were picked up while they were incarnate. And so they're best addressed through another incarnation.
So one thing is to heal, but can there be other kind of life missions in a way? Can it be specific to what you're going to create for this world? If you're, for instance, you know, having perhaps a mission to share knowledge about this, or sharing light or information, or maybe you were supposed to be a scientist, you know, discovering something. Can that be life missions as well?
One thing I saw in my research for the books, every single time I went into somebody's pre-birth planning session, without exception, there was always a component of the life plan that involved service to others. So in my case, the form that service takes is to be a hypnotist and to write the 2 books about pre-birth planning. By having the show that you have, you're engaged in a particular form of service to others. A lot of times, though, most often, in fact, it's not a public form of service. Service would be being the best mother that you could be, or the best father, the best son, the best daughter. But in one form or another, and to one degree or another, this component of service to others has been present in literally every single pre-birth plan I've ever looked at.
Have you looked into astrology? Because I'm curious, when these plans are made, I assume, like, I'm fascinated about how the stars are set in a certain way when we come down to this earth and how it affects us. And it seems so brilliant to me. It just seems so intelligent how then I'm colored by that. And is that something you have looked into? When, like, that it perhaps it's agreed upon exactly the moment that we're being born in order to have certain, I don't know, skills or things happening to us, so we get the exact environment that we need to meet. Yeah, so that the plan can be executed in a way.
Yeah, astrology is something that I am a great believer in. It's not something that I've researched a whole lot for my work, but my understanding is that we do choose the time that we will be born. And as you said, when you choose to come into body energetically, there's an imprint that is created by the astrological configuration at that time. And it has a lot to do with the gifts that you're going to have, the skills, and basically how you're going to fulfill your pre-birth plan.
Right. So, can you tell us a little bit about these masters that are working with us? In a sense, I'm trying to like picture this, how this can look like the whole pre-birth planning. You were speaking about the Council of Elders. What is that, for instance? Is that those souls that are working with us to plan our lives?
The term Council of Elders originated from Michael Newton. Newton is an American hypnotist who, back in the 1990s, as I understand it, was practicing relatively conventional forms of hypnotism until one day he had a client who spontaneously went home, who spontaneously went back to the other side. And this client started to tell Newton in tremendous detail everything about life on the other side. He described the homes we create for each other, the classes we take, the games we play. Well, Newton realized he was on to a major discovery, and he shifted fields professionally and pioneered what he called life between lives regression. I call it a between lives soul regression, but it's the same thing. What Newton found is that and he spoke just of one council of elders, a group of beings who are very, very highly evolved, extremely wise, very loving, so highly evolved as to really be beyond human comprehension. And these beings, according to Newton, oversee the cycle of reincarnation on Earth. Now, what I find in my private hypnosis practice is that there isn't just one council of elders. Everybody has their own particular council of elders. So the number of beings varies. The actual beings who are on the council vary. Sometimes it's prominent spiritual or religious figures, but more often than not, it's not beings whose names would be known to us, but just very highly evolved beings who have, in service to that particular person, agreed to be on their council. And they monitor the incarnations and make sure that the person is evolving in the way that the soul has laid out for them.
But it's always free will, right? So you can actually, I mean, I'm thinking about people who are deciding to end it because it just gets too difficult. And I'm curious about why I hear stories about some people being stopped in doing that. That I've heard some stories about someone meeting a person all of a sudden, or saying to them, you know, you can't do this, or just somehow they end up not taking their lives, and all of a sudden that person is gone, it disappears, while others don't, you know, get any help or get stopped. And I'm wondering about that. Do you have any perspective on that?
There's an entire chapter in Your Soul's Gift about the pre-birth planning of suicide. And the story here is about an American woman named Carolyn and her only child, a son named Cameron. Cameron carried back into body energies that were left unhealed from previous lives for the purpose of healing them. And he knew before he was born that by bringing these energies into body to the extent that he was, it would cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. Well, when Cameron was 18 years old, right after he graduated from high school, he was so depressed that he actually took his own life. He hung himself in Carolyn's home, and she was the one who found him and had to cut him down. Now, Carolyn and I worked with a channel in the Netherlands who channels Jesus. He plays a prominent role in Your Soul's Gift. And Jesus comes into the channeling session, and I ask him, is suicide something that is planned by a soul prior to birth? And he says, it is never planned as a certainty, but it is planned as a possibility, or sometimes a probability, or occasionally a probability so high as to be almost certain. And then he says this was the case with Cameron. Cameron knew by bringing these energies into body that his suicide was almost certain. So we go on in the session and we talk more with Jesus about what you just inquired about. How is suicide prevented by beings who step in to prevent the suicide? And what Jesus tells us is that if the individual who is suicidal has even the slightest willingness or openness to change their mind, the universe knows that, and the universe stages an intervention. So this means that every suicide that could have been prevented actually was prevented. And that to me is one of the most healing pieces of information I found in all the years I've been doing this kind of research. Because so often when a suicide occurs, of course, family and friends feel guilty, they blame themselves, they think they should have done something to prevent it. The fact of the matter is that every suicide that could have been prevented actually was prevented. So if you know someone who took their own life, any guilt or self-blame you feel about it, I would invite you to put it down and step away from it, because there was literally nothing you could have done to prevent the suicide.
And I've read that you've said that often people who commit suicide, they return pretty quickly back in their bodies and incarnate quickly. Yeah.
As a general rule, that is true. And what they will do is pick up with the same lesson or lessons that they had in the lifetime in which they took their own lives. So people who are committing suicide look at it as an escape. But once you get back to the other side, from that perspective, it becomes much more clear just what an incredibly valuable gift an incarnation on Earth is. And then from that perspective, you are intensely motivated to come back into body and finish learning whatever you came here to learn.
It's beautiful to hear that there's no judgment about it, because I remember a few years ago, I think it was 10, 15 years ago, I felt like there were more opinions on suicide, that you must never do it, and that was kind of a mistake and you would have trouble on the other side. And I don't know if you've seen What Dreams May Come, that film. Yeah, and the woman who's taking her life, she is experiencing, hell on the other side, and she almost don't get out of the hell even though she's on the other side. What do you think about that? I'm curious about why it was so hard for her, for instance, to wake up to the fact that she was dead and she could be in a happy place if she just opened her mind to it, but she was just so depressed still.
Well, it's interesting. In the suicide chapter in Your Soul's Gift, as part of the channeling session, Cameron, the boy who took his life, comes in and he talks to us in great detail about his experience right after he took his life and crossed over. And he tells us that right after the suicide, when he returned to the non-physical realm, he was in what he called a gray area. And he says that he then started to see his guides, and he talks about how fortunate he was to see his guides. The implication being that many people who take their lives don't see their guides that quickly. For him, the process of emerging from the gray area happened pretty quickly, but for some people it doesn't, and that would be the case in the movie that you described. So everybody who takes their own life is surrounded by loving guides and angels who are beaming love and light to them. But because of the heavy, dense energy that caused them to suicide, they're not always able to perceive it right away.
Yeah, it seems like they're carrying some of the same mindset over before they kind of realize or awaken, in a sense. I mean, it's very interesting how dense the mindset can be. And it's almost like, you know, this cloud that we can actually just see one reality and we can't almost see what's outside there. And I can recognize that just in myself, in my everyday life, how I'm in a bubble sometimes, that I'm just thinking, and you don't see what's around you. So, and there's probably different levels of that. So let's move on to law of attraction and surrendering and manifesting and creating, you know, from this free will. How, in a sense, does this work all together? Because some people are speaking about how we can manifest our lives through surrendering, like letting it up to like the divine. I'm surrendering. And others are more speaking about how we can use our minds to create things and visualize and change our minds and change our thoughts. How does this go together? It's a bit back to the faith thing, but I'm curious about creating. How are we creating things through your perspective?
My understanding of how we create is through our frequency, through our vibration. You draw or magnetize to yourself other people who are of a similar vibration and experiences and resources that are at a similar vibration. So the vibration that you're sending out to the universe is a combination of thought and feeling. In other words, if let's say you're trying to use the law of attraction to manifest greater wealth, which is what many people try to do with it, if all you do is think about greater wealth, that's the equivalent metaphorically of sending a black and white movie out to the universe saying you want more money. But if you really get into the feeling of what it would feel like to have tremendous wealth, tremendous abundance, metaphorically, that's the equivalent of sending a Technicolor movie out into the universe saying you want more abundance. You're just giving the universe a much richer and much more powerful indication of what it is that you want to magnetize to you. So the combination of thought and feeling is particularly potent.
So can we override, in a sense, the plan if we're, I mean, I'm just wondering how powerful we are as human beings. Can we override the plan in a way if we really put that Technicolor vision out there?
It depends, again, on whether or not you're learning what you came here to learn. So if we come back to the metaphorical, hypothetical story of Sally and George, for example, Sally was here to learn how to stand up for herself and demand that others treat her with respect and kindness. If she sends out the Technicolor movies, so to speak, that she wants everybody to treat her that way, it isn't going to manifest unless she's actually learned the lesson. So the lesson is pretty much set in stone, but within that parameter, you have a lot of leeway as to how it actually plays out. There's a very good analogy that answers this question that's used in the Conversation with God books by the American author Neil Donald Walsh.
I just interviewed him.
And, well, in one of his books, the same question comes up that you just asked, and God responds to Neil by using an interesting analogy. He says that your life on Earth is very much like a video game. So if you think about how a video game works, the parameters of the game are established by the software. You can't actually do something that the software doesn't permit. You can't, for example, make the avatar jump off the screen and appear in 3 dimensions in your living room. But within the framework established by the software, you can move your avatar up and down and all around, make what seem to be free will decisions. And so those decisions propel you up the levels of the video game at either a faster or slower pace, depending upon how skillful the decisions are. If you make unskillful decisions, your avatar is killed, it goes back to the lowest level and has to start over again. If you make skillful decisions, the avatar ascends up the levels very quickly and relatively painlessly, and then you win the video game, so to speak. So the life plan is the equivalent of the parameters of the software of of the video game. But within those parameters, you have a lot of leeway to use your free will.
So it seems like to me that we are learning through hard lessons all the time, a lot of the time, that we need to suffer. And I'm wondering, why can't we sometimes have a life of abundance and learn from that? It just seems I'm hearing so many stories about the suffering and the learning through the loss and the heartbreak. Are there such life missions that you're just going to feel joy, for instance, like learn what joy is?
There are life plans that are very much as you've just described. I refer to them as vacation lifetimes. Everybody will have vacation lifetimes now and then. You would choose to have a vacation lifetime if you had never had one before, or to reward yourself for a previous life well lived. The soul wants to experience everything. And the lifetime that is filled with joy and relative ease is a type of experience that is important to the soul. We don't hear discussion a lot about that because in spiritual circles, people want to know what is the deeper meaning of the suffering. But as much can be learned from joyful lives as well.
Right. So you have been speaking also about 30 or something virtues that a soul can take on or learn from, or that we are bringing a focus on a few virtues in the lifetime. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. What I found in my research for Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift is that when we went into the pre-birth planning sessions and listened to the conversation that souls were having on the soul level, a lot of the discussion when souls were planning challenges revolved around a soul level desire to cultivate and then express while embody certain qualities that are important to the soul. And I gave these qualities the name divine virtues. Over a period of years, I put together a list of the virtues that came up the most often in the pre-birth planning sessions. Examples would be unconditional love, compassion, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and so on. What happens is that as you are planning a lifetime, and particularly as you're planning challenges, the average person will choose to work on 2 or 3 virtues in a lifetime. Very rarely there's somebody who has chosen to work on 4 or 5. The person who's working on 4 or 5 generally has a lifetime filled with trauma. If you don't immediately know that you're working on 4 or 5, you're not. You're working on 2 or 3. And the way it works is that the life challenge is intended to be a catalyst that motivates you to develop a certain virtue, and that also gives you an opportunity to then express that virtue, usually in some form of service to others. So when I teach about this in my workshops, I draw a basic XY graph, and the y-axis, the vertical axis, is consciousness. The x or horizontal axis is time. If you just draw a straight line angling up and then spiking at a certain point, the point where it starts to spike is an inflection point. That's the life challenge. The life challenge is intended to stimulate tremendous increase in the level of consciousness through the form of developing, expressing a virtue. That's basically how it works.
Wonderful. How can we find out what we are working on?
Well, the Divine Virtues exercise is something I do with clients in what I refer to as a spiritual guidance session. It's a 1-hour session done by phone or Skype, in which I take people through the Divine Virtues exercise, and by the time we're done, you should know the 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or 5 virtues you're working on. Anyone who is interested in that can go to yoursoulsplan.com, go into the store in the main menu, and then you'll find the spiritual guidance session.
But can we, if we don't have the possibility to contact you or work with you, can we do it ourselves in a way? Can we find the virtues ourselves somehow?
You could certainly meditate on that or ask for that information to come to you in a dream. I think a lot of people know intuitively which virtues they're working on. If you don't intuitively know, what you could do is just think about the major challenges you've experienced and what kind of growth came out of them. And if you really sit with that for a long time and give it a lot of thought, you should start to notice a pattern in which certain kinds of challenges came back around, usually in increasingly intense form, until you got the underlying lesson. The underlying lesson is usually one of the virtues.
That was very crucial, and that's so important, and that's not easy to grasp sometimes, because in our darkest moments we just or I can just only speak for myself, often you just want to get out of it. You want to forget it happened. It just hurts so much, you know. You don't really want to investigate it, but still, it's in that darkness, I think, where the gold is, where the deepest lesson is about yourself. And it's so powerful, and it's so magnificent how the light and the dark is dancing with each other in a way. And I think it's so important to embrace that too, to look at that and dare to look at that, because you can learn so much about yourself, and learn much more, and realize that you are the light, that you are not that darkness, but that it's teaching you something about yourself. Is there anything you want to say in the end, Robert? Because you're breaking up, the Skype is a little bit bad right now, the connection, and there's, you know, this information I feel like is so important, and I want to get every detail, but I think it's a bit hard to say, hear what you're saying right now. But just in the end, do you want to share a last message?
I think the most important message I would like to leave people with is just to remind you of who you really are. Most of us are very much identified with the physical body, with our emotions, with our thoughts, but these are things that you have, things that you carry while you're in an incarnation. Just because you have a thing, that doesn't mean you are the thing you have. After all, if you have a horse, that doesn't mean that you are a horse. By the same token, just because you have a body, thoughts, and feelings, that doesn't mean you are those things. You're not. You're much more than that. You're a divine, sacred, holy being, a very, very courageous being for coming into body on planet Earth, which is one of the more difficult schools in the universe. So have respect for yourself and admiration for yourself for having the courage to incarnate here, because when this lifetime is over and you travel around the universe doing whatever you choose to do, other beings will know from your energy signature, your vibration, that you were on Earth, and they will have tremendous, tremendous respect and admiration for you simply because you came here. So I would encourage you to have that same respect and admiration for yourself right now.
That's beautiful. I've heard that before, that there are courageous souls that are coming down to this planet, because it's not an easy place to be. Thank you so much, Robert, and good luck with all your wonderful work. It was wonderful speaking to you again and to delve into this. And I can really recommend for you guys who are watching to read both books. They are really fascinating. And there are many examples there of other people who've had sessions where that exemplifies and really paint the picture of how this works, because we just, we're skimming the surface right now. Thank you so much, Robert.
It was my pleasure. I'm always happy to talk with you.
And thank you for watching, guys, and much light from the US and Norway. Bye-bye.